stories. And I have a story for you tonight that I think you're going to enjoy a lot. It was written by Joyce Wachowski, and when I read it, I decided that I must versify this poem and recite it for children. Can we turn that echo down and the bass out and a little light, and we're getting there, aren't we? This is the tale of Jonathan Toomey. The children all called him Mr. Gloomy, and though it's not nice to call people names, this one fits so well that it's stuck in their brains. Never smiling or laughing, he went about mumbling, muttering, sputtering, griping and grumbling. He complained that the church bells rang too proudly, that the birds sang shrilly, the children played loudly. Jonathan Toomey carved wood all day. The best in the valley is what some folks say. He hunched at his workbench, carving on pine, hickory or chestnut with a grain that is fine, making beautiful shapes till supper at night. Then he'd sit by the fire and smoke his pipe, and he'd gaze at the flames, and his mind would stray to a time when his heart had been light and gay. Now, it wasn't his age that made Jonathan frown or walk bent forward with head hung down, so you wouldn't notice the hue of his eye, as clean and blue as an August sky. And you wouldn't notice his dimpled chin, for his beard was shaggy and needed a trim, and was speckled with sawdust and crumbs from his meal. No, Toomey was sad, and his sorrow was real. In the village, the people knew naught of his gloom, while he toiled at his bench, hunched up in his room. A few years before, he'd been full of life. He'd been young and in love, with a baby and wife. But the babe became sick, and so did its mother, and they both died 3 days apart from each other. Then Jonathan Toomey just packed up and travelled away from the place where his life came unravelled, and not till the tears in his eyes stopped flowing did his wagon stop rolling where'er he was going. And that's how he came to the village end, and why he sat carving alone, without friend. To his door, in December, when the snow was a-falling, the widow McDowell and her son came a-calling. "I'm 7, said Thomas, and I know how to whistle." "Bah, whistling is pish-posh," he said with a bristle. "I need something carved," the woman said, pleading. "A creche set, like Grandpa made, that's what I'm needing. After I came here, I found ours was gone. I hoped for a miracle, but nothing has come." "There are no miracles," said Jonathan Toomey. "Now, can you describe those figures to me?" "There were sheep," said the woman. "2," added Tom, "with curly wool." "Yes, 2," said his mum. "And a cow, and an angel, and Joseph on his knee, baby Jesus and Mary, and wise men." "There were 3. And the widow appealed as she stood at the sill. "Will you take the job?" Toomey nodded. "I will." "I must have them by Christmas." But she couldn't say more. "Blah, Christmas is pish-posh," he said, shutting the door. In the following week, with his workday begun, to his door came the widow and Thomas, her son. He muttered and sputtered as he answered the knock, went to the door and unlatched the lock. "Excuse me," said the widow as she stood in the snow. "Can my son watch you work for a while or so? He wants to carve wood when he grows up, like you, and he knows you're the best the whole valley through." "I'll be quiet," piped in Thomas. "You won't know I'm here." With a grumble, the woodcarver ushered him near his workbench and, pointing down at a stool, said, "No talking, no jiggling, no noise. That's the rule." Then the widow McDowell pressed a loaf in his hand of warm cornbread, a token of thanks she had planned. With her knitting she stole towards the old rocking chair. "No," bellowed Toomey, "no one sits there." So she moved by the fire to the straight-backed one, where she watched Thomas sit quietly, not moving a hair. Once, when the need to sneeze arose, he held back with his finger under his nose. Once, when his leg desperately needed scratching, he counted to keep his mind off the itching. Oh, Thomas sat still for a very long time. Then, clearing his throat, he started to prime. "May I ask a question?" he whispered, now bolder. The woodcarver glared and then shrugged his shoulder. As Thomas decided this answer meant yes, he continued, encouraged, nevertheless. "Is that my sheep you're carving?" Thomas asked without guile. The woodcarver nodded, and for a while Thomas waited, and then in a whisper went on, "Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but you're carving it wrong." The widow McDowell's knitting needle stopped clicking. Mr. Toomey stopped carving. His knife stopped its flicking. "It's a beautiful sheep, nice and curly, but, well, my sheep looked happy," he ventured to tell. "That's pish posh. Sheep are sheep," Toomey said with a frown. "They can't look happy," he said, looking down. "Mine did, Mr. Toomey. They knew where they were. They were with baby Jesus and were happy, sir." He was quiet for the rest of the afternoon, till the 6 o'clock church chime stole through the room. "Awful noise," grumbled Toomey under his breath. Then the widow McDowell said, "It's time that we left." Then Thomas sneezed 3 times in a row, thanked the woodcarver, and turned to go. Mr. Toomey that night, before going to bed, supped on boiled potatoes and the widow's cornbread. Then he went to his bench. His knife he picked up, and he worked on that sheet till his eyelids drooped shut. A few days later, to a knock at his door, griping and grumbling, he went as before. There again stood the widow McDowell and her son. "May I watch again?" young Thomas began, sat himself on the stool as he was able, while his mother laid sweet-smelling buns on the table. Mr. Toomey said gruffly, "The teapot is warm." His head was bent over some animal form. While he carved, the widow McDowell poured the tea, placed a cup and a bun close where he could see. She tried not to notice as she touched him gently, but soon both the plate and the cup were empty. Thomas tried eating the bun he was given without smacking his lips, which is hard when you're 7, and when he'd finished, he tried to sit still. He almost held his breath till his face turned red, and once unaware, he began swinging his leg till the woodcarver's glare stopped him, and his legs fell asleep as he sat on the stool, not making a peep. Oh, Thomas sat still for a very long time. Then, clearing his throat, he started to prime. "May I ask a question?" he whispered, now bolder, polite but bolder, and half a week older. "Is that my cow you're carving?" Tom asked, thinly reeded. But a nod and a grunt was all that proceeded. And so, in a whisper, Thomas went on, "Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but you're carving it wrong. It's a beautiful cow, and if I'm allowed, the best that I've seen. But my cow looked proud." "That's pish posh. Cows are cows," Mr. Toomey growled. "Everyone knows a cow can't look proud." "My Mr. Toomey. It knew Jesus was born in the stable beside her on Christmas morn. He was quiet for the rest of the afternoon, and the only sound that was heard in the room was the carving knife scraping flick, 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 and the widow's humming and knitting, click, click, click. And not till the church bells chimed 6 o'clock did Toomey let up and the carving stop. "There's that noise," he grumbled under his breath. And the widow McDowell said, "It's time we left." Supper that night was a raisin bun and boiled potatoes. And when he was done, he went to his bench, his knife he picked up, and he worked on that cow till his eyelids drooped shut. A few days later, there came a knock. He went to answer it, smoothing his crop. There again stood the widow McDowell and her son. "May I watch again?" young Thomas began. His mother warmed up the tea by the grate, set molasses cookies out on a plate. Tom watched the woodcarver work on a figure of an angel and asked with his eyes getting bigger, "Is that my angel you're carving?" And then ere long came, "Yes, do me a favour. Tell me what I've done wrong." Well, my angel had an important look, because God sent it for Jesus, it says in the book. And just how does one get that important look, huh? And can you tell me just how I should make an angel important that's made out of wood? "You'll know," answered Thomas. "You'll know just what to do. You're the best woodcarver the whole valley through." "Mr. Toomey," asked Thomas after a very long time, "excuse me, may I ask a question at a time?" "Do you ever stop talking?" Mr. Toomey repined. "My mother says not, but that if I'm inclined I could learn of the virtue of silence from you." The woodcarver flushed pink, and the widow did too. Her face was as red as the scarf she was knitting. "Well, speak up," said the carver. "What is your question?" "Please, Mr. Toomey, will you teach me to carve?" Thomas said, pleading and straight from the heart. "I'm a very busy man," Toomey said with a frown, but he put the important angel down. "You'll carve a bird." "I hope it's a robin, because," said Thomas, "I do like the robin." On a piece of brown paper, the woodcarver sketched a robin with charcoal, and then he fetched a small block of pine wood and a knife that was sharp. These he handed to Thomas, and they both made a start. Mr. Toomey showed Thomas just how to lop the corners off from the top of the block and how to make the edges smooth, and Thomas copied every move. All afternoon they were so intent, tongue on lip and head so bent, that when at last the church bells chimed, Jonathan Toomey did not seem to mind. He was guiding the knife along the wing. As they chimed, he never heard a thing. Then the widow McDowell said, "It's time to leave." Thomas wiped the wood shavings off his sleeve. He thanked Mr. Toomey for teaching him. Mr. Toomey wiped chips from his beard and his chin. That night, before taking his ease, he supped on boiled potatoes and molasses cookies. Then he went to his workbench, his knife he picked up, and he carved an angel till his eyelids drooped shut. A few days later, to a knock at his door, the woodcarver jumped up and sprang across the floor. With bouquet in hand, there the widow stood, and Thomas with his partly carved robin of wood. As Thomas and Toomey were carving away, the widow McDowell arranged the bouquet. She scrubbed the table, put sprigs in the jar, and set out a cloth from the bottom drawer. "Next I carved Joseph and the 3 wise men. Perhaps you can tell me before I begin about the mistakes I'm going to make, so I will know what steps to take." Well, my wise men had wonderful robes, Thomas said, and Joseph was serious and bowing his head with arms outstretched, protecting the babe. And that's how those figures should be made. It was not till the church bells chimed 6 again, and the widow and Thomas were leaving, not till then, that the woodcarver saw the jar full of pine and the tablecloth stitched with flowers so fine. "I found the cloth in the bottom drawer. I thought it looked pretty," she smiled from the door. "Never go to that drawer," was his harsh remark. And when they had left, and when it was dark, Jonathan put the cloth away, had potatoes for supper, and ended his day. Then he went to his workbench, his knife he picked up. He carved Joseph and wise men till his eyelids drooped shut. The next time the widow and Tom came to call, the woodcarver sprang up. He did not wait at all. While Thomas watched the woodcarver until it was dark, and on leaving they heard Mr. Toomey remark, "I'm on Mary and baby now. Can you recall how they looked?" Thomas said, "The most special of all." Jesus was smiling. He reached up to his mother. Mary looked like she loved him more than any other. "Tomorrow is Christmas. Will the figures be done?" asked the widow McDowell with her hand on her son. "They'll be ready when they're ready," Mr. Toomey replied. "Oh, I understand," the widow sighed. Then she handed 2 packages over to him. "Merry Christmas," she said, before he could begin. With his arms folded across his chest, "I want no presents," he harshly confessed. That's exactly the reason why we give the gift. She put them down on the table, and then she left. Jonathan Toomey sat down at the table. He opened a present with care. Inside he found a bright red scarf, warm, hand-knit and fair. He tied the scarf around his neck, then opened the second twine. It held a robin with lopsided wings, crudely carved of pine. As he ran his fingers over the wings, a smile twitched on his face. Then he dusted a spot and set it right over the fireplace. Jonathan Toomey did not sup that night. Instead, he began to draw the figures of Mary and Jesus, which he wadded and tossed on the floor. Try as he might, though he struggled all night, he just couldn't get the images right. He picked up a block and tried carving again. Disappointed, he tossed the log on the flames. Then, when he heard the church bells ringing and the midnight service was beginning, for inspiration, he went to the drawer with the cloth he'd scolded the widow for. He took out the cloth with the lilies and daisies. He took out a shawl and a hanky of lace. He took out a baby blanket and socks. Then a picture frame lit up his face. The frame held a sketch of a woman sitting back in a rocking chair. She held a baby with outstretched arms, reaching up to her hair. The woman was smiling down at her son, her beautiful baby boy. And Jonathan Toomey sat back in his rocker and cried tears of sorrow and joy. He rocked with the picture clutched to his chest. He rocked with his eyes shut tight, and two little tears trailed down to his beard and gleamed in the firelight. He took the picture to his bench and worked all through the night. His fingers worked quickly and surely, and were done with the morning light. At the widow McDowell's home next morning, there came a knock at the door. She answered to find the woodcarver, red-scarfed, holding a box full of straw. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Mr. Toomey, what a delightful surprise." "The figures are ready and here they are," he said as he stepped inside. Jonathan unpacked 2 curly sheep. He unpacked a cow that was proud. He unpacked a very important angel with wings stretching down to the ground. Jonathan unpacked 3 wise men, wearing wonderful robes in rich fold, bearing gifts for a baby boy, frankincense, myrrh, and gold. He unpacked a serious, caring Joseph, and Mary in rough woolen shawl, smiling down at her Jesus, who reached to her face the most precious baby of all. And that day, Jonathan Toomey, with the widow McDowell and her son, went to the Christmas service before the day was done. And that day, in the churchyard, the village children saw Mr. Toomey laugh with head thrown back. They'd never seen that before. And you could see the hue of his eye as blue as an August sky. And nobody called him gloomy again. Not them, not thee, nor I. Amen. Thank you very much indeed. It's delightful. It's a poet's dream to have somebody listen to his poems. Thank you. Merry Christmas to you all.